Good morning. Oh, thank you. Hi. Thanks, Carmen. Good morning and welcome to our last leadership luncheon of the year, and what for some of us is the last leadership luncheon of our law school careers. Thank you so much for being here today. I have a few quick announcements before we get started. First of all, if it is your last leadership lunch of your law school career, or if you have just completed your 15 credits, don't forget that the essay, the capstone essay prompt is on HatterSync, and you can go ahead and take that to complete your requirements and get your leadership certificate. Second, our speaker today is talking about management, and as this is the last leadership luncheon, I will be before you as your executive chair. I wanted to take a moment to speak about the team that I have had the privilege to manage this year. If you haven't met the members of your Student Leadership Development Committee, they are some of the most wonderful people at Stetson Law in my humble opinion and in my experience. And they have been the greatest team that I've been able to be a part of, and they have taught me the difference between group work and teamwork. So I thank you for the opportunity to be your executive chair this year. And now it is my distinct privilege to introduce next year's executive chair, who will be introducing our speaker today. So please welcome Clinton Simmons, your next executive chair.
Hi everyone, thank you all for being here. I have the honor and privilege of introducing my friend Sarah, who's going to be speaking to us today about management. Sarah actually graduated from Stetson in 2010. In law school, she was involved with trial team and the SBA. After law school, Sarah joined the Pinellas Public Defender's Office, where she handled a wide variety of cases as an assistant public defender, ranging from misdemeanors to death penalty cases. She now works as an assistant federal public defender in Tampa, representing indigent clients in federal court. Not only that, she is a faculty member of the National College of Capital Voir Dire, as well as an adjunct professor at Stetson, where she teaches trial advocacy. Sarah also serves as the internship director for the Federal Defender's Office and has loved meeting and working with students like myself. Please help me welcome Sarah Michkowski.
Hi everybody, happy Wednesday. Okay, I'm gonna put this down here because I don't trust that I won't spill it on myself. Okay. So, as Clinton said, my name is Sarah. I'm a lawyer that's currently practicing in Tampa in federal criminal defense. And Clinton participated in the internship at my office, which I run, and I had the opportunity to work with him. And he asked me to come in here and speak to you all today. And the topic that I was given was just management. And that, I think we could all agree, is a very broad topic. There are businesses that do entire seminars and retreats related to the concept of management. If you Google it, you can find an infinite, practically, number of books on the topic of management and all kinds of nuances related to the concept. So what I did was try to consider this concept of management through the lens of law school and law practice, and I'm just here to talk to you about things that I wish I had known when I was a law student entering the legal profession in the context of management. So, if you look up the definition of management, it's something approximating the process of dealing with or controlling things or people. So again, a very broad concept that can be applied in many settings. But really, ultimately, when it comes down to it, there are two factors at play in management, which are other people and yourself. And so those are the dual concepts that I'm going to focus on today. And so just some little reminders before I start is that the process of managing, of interacting with other people, of dealing with or controlling other things or people might be more natural or intuitive or easy for some people than it is for others, but don't let anyone fool you into thinking that it doesn't require some amount of work. It does. It requires effort on our part, and I want to talk about how we can do that. And the other thing I want you to know about management is that I'm sure you all know this by now and have experienced this in your lives thus far and in law school, but unexpected things will happen in your professional and your personal lives. It's, I think, natural in almost every profession, and it is certainly inherent in the practice of law. So controlling some of the variables that I'm going to talk to you about today will help you have a system in place so you can navigate the things that you do encounter that will be out of your control, which are inevitable. So these two factors, other people and yourself. I'd like to start by talking about other people. And there are three main concepts that I want to talk about related to that. And the three things that I want to cover are listen, lead, and respect when it comes to interacting with and managing your relationships with other people, both in law school, but also I'm really gearing this towards practice in the legal profession. So first of all, this idea of listening. If you've ever taken trial ad or taken my trial ad class, or many other law classes, active listening is an exercise that is not necessarily easy or intuitive, and I would encourage you to learn about what active listening is, the process of concentrating on what someone is saying, fully understanding what they're saying, responding to what they're saying, and remembering it. It's important in a legal setting, in a courtroom setting, if you are engaging with witnesses or a judge or opposing counsel, and it's important in an office setting if you're going to interact with your coworkers, with support staff, etc. Being a true active listener is a really important part of being a good manager. And if you look up materials about management, you'll find that that's frequently one of the earliest concepts that's discussed. In addition to listen, if you ever want to be a good manager, it's important to be a good leader. We've all, I think, interacted with either personally or in an education setting like this or in a work setting with people that were less than pleasant to deal with. And if you're going to try to exercise control over other things and people in a professional setting, you need to start by being the kind of person that other people want to interact with, and by being the kind of person that other people want to work with. And ultimately, you should start by being the kind of lawyer that you would want to work with in a courtroom setting as your adversary, or the kind of employee that you would expect your coworkers to be. So you probably won't get through much of your law practice before something unexpected happens to you. And that's not to be negative. That is the nature of this type of work. And I think most people, myself definitely included in this, had to very quickly reach out to experienced support staff. Like in the first job that I got, I was working with legal assistants that were much older than me and very experienced, and other experienced lawyers to get help, to figure out what I was supposed to do in a situation that was new and different to me. And it is so much easier to ask people for things when they know that you respect them, that you're going to treat them well, and that ultimately, if you ever have the chance, you would return the favor. So by acting like the kind of person you would want to work with, you're in a much better position to ask things of other people and to influence your work environment. And that's really, I think, difficult when you come out, because we had a professionalism day when I was here, and it was sort of, there was a different program every year for 1Ls, 2Ls, and 3Ls. I don't know if that still goes on. But one of the things that we focused on for the 3L programming was what it's like to suddenly kind of be the boss of some other people. I mean, you're this new lawyer, you go out there, you might be young if you went straight through, you might be in your 20s, and all of a sudden you have a legal assistant who might have been doing that job for 10, 15, 20 years, and the dynamic that can create. And so by acting in a way that you would want to work, the person that you would want to work with, you're in a much better position to develop these good relationships really quickly, and have a good working relationship with people that you will ultimately come to rely on in your practice. And then related to that is the concept of respect. So it's inherent, I think, in the working world and definitely in the practice of law that conflicts will arise. There are certain jobs like mine where they are adversarial in nature, so conflict is actually built in to what you're doing and expected. But even among people on your own team, and when you're working towards a common goal, it's just inevitable that things will happen where two people don't necessarily see eye to eye or there's some miscommunication. So by accepting that this conflict will happen and thinking ahead of time about how you will deal with it, you better prepare yourself to navigate that in a workplace setting. And I think it's important to spend some time thinking about that. And so I would encourage you in relating to other people in this concept of management to think about the fact that these conflicts are never personal, they're always professional, and you have to focus on the common goals that people have if it's someone within your office, and to make sure that you understand that this conflict is navigable, it's built into the job, and it's easy to move past as long as you anticipate it and spend some time thinking about how you would navigate it ahead of time. And so the ability to deal with other people and navigate relationships with other people in the workplace is something that you will figure out as you do it, and there are a lot of materials available to help you with that process. And I'm certainly not an HR expert or human resources expert or a management expert in that context. What I really want to focus more on is the control you have over yourself, because I genuinely believe that how you take care of yourself, what you know about yourself, and how you conduct yourself in a professional setting is really the foundation of being a good manager and managing your life and managing your professional obligations. So I really, I'm going to spend more time talking about that. So, my first piece of advice on this, and something that I wish I had thought more about when I was a law student, was getting to know myself. And I'll explain what I mean by that. But some of you might relate to the idea of being an intelligent person who did not find undergraduate particularly challenging. It might have been something that you moved through and handled readily, and you didn't have to necessarily develop specific coping skills, strict study habits, strict personal health habits to get through college. It might have just come naturally to you and been something that was pretty easy. And I think people that fall into that category tend to make it to law school at higher rates. And I know for me, I can speak for myself, law school was the first time that I had to start to develop much stricter study habits, to really keep an eye on my schedule and manage things in a way that I never had to when I was an undergrad. And I could have done a better job. So what I'm here to say is I would encourage you to spend some time consciously thinking about the following things and not just stumbling upon them by happenstance. Like, what are your limits? At what point do you overcommit? At what point do you burn out? How many credits can you take in one semester? What's reasonable? How many hours a week can you actually work? What happens to you when you overcommit? When I was in law school, there was a certain point every semester where I would get sick, basically. I would get like this flu type thing and be like, oh, what's going on? And it took me a long time to figure out like, oh, this is always the time of year where I have like 100 hours a week of commitments, and those things go hand in hand, and that's always gonna happen. I wasn't being intentional about it. It was just sort of a light bulb moment that I had. And so I think that this setting is a lab setting, which I'll talk a little more about, where you could really take the opportunity to be very intentional in finding out for yourself, both personally and professionally, what you can handle, what you can't handle when it comes to commitments. In addition to that, I think that this is a good time to start thinking intentionally about what your communication style is. And towards the end of this, I'll give some tips on how I think you can approach these things if you aren't already or if you don't have any ideas about that. But before you get into the workplace and you're having to communicate with coworkers and opposing counsel and the courts and the clerk of the courts and all of the various parties that come together in the legal practice, I think that it is imperative to spend some amount of time figuring out how you best communicate. How do you best receive information? What is your communication style? Are you super blunt? Are you bad at being blunt? How do you respond to criticism and how do you give criticism? These are all things that you will have to do, and it's much more comfortable, and I think it's easier to ease into the practice of law if you start spending some time now in this setting to think about these things. Because if you leave it up to practice to wing it, that could have some negative consequences, which I'll talk about. So spend some time thinking about if you're going to be a manager, if you're going to try to influence people and yourself in a work setting, spend some time getting to know yourself and your style, because that's going to be foundational to figuring out how you interact with and influence other people. In addition to learning these things about yourself personally in terms of commitments and communication, I would also encourage you to get organized if you're not already. And I know law school does force some of that, as I was saying about this phenomenon of kind of coasting through undergrad and then coming to law school and figuring out that the old habits don't really work that well. And that might not have been you, but I do know some people like that I went to law school with. This is the time to figure out what organizational styles work for you. You can't manage other people if you can't manage yourself or your own life or stay organized. It's just not going to work out. So I would encourage you to invest in the time and effort that it takes to figure out what's responsive for you. And I know it seems silly, but some people like a very rigid structure, some people like less structure, some people prefer paper calendars and all kinds of notes or a sticky note system, or there are apps for this, and there are all kinds of electronic ways to manage and organize your life. If you haven't been through it already, I think there will be a certain amount of trial and error to really figure this out. So once again, in this law school setting where you have obligations, you have pressures, and you're having to manage various commitments on a regular basis and relationships with other people, this is a great way to prepare yourself to transition into the legal practice by figuring these things out right now. When I was thinking about this, I was kind of thinking about this Marie Kondo effect that's like swept, all over the place because of the book and the Netflix series. And there's all kinds of stuff to be said about that. But one concept I think it does apply to what we're talking about today, which is that if you have less stuff going on, it's easier to see what's on your plate. If you have more stuff going on, it gets more complicated to track what you're doing and where you're supposed to be and what you have to have done and what deadlines exist. And all of this converges in a massive way in the profession that you all are going into. So making sure that you have a system in place that you can utilize, that feels good for you, that you can maintain, is absolutely critical. Because you can't really be a good coworker, be a good employee, or be a good advocate for your clients if you cannot control your own life and your own schedule. And then the other thing that I want to spend some time talking about related to knowing yourself and taking care of yourself in order to be the best manager, lawyer, employee that you can be is the concept of self-care. This is not to say, I think some people rebel at the idea of self-care as maybe being like touchy-feely or not, I don't need that or whatever the case may be. But our profession is one that has, and I have some information on this, but higher substance abuse rates, higher mental health issues than other professions that are out there because of the pressures associated with being a lawyer. It's just a natural part of what we do. And so you have to take care of yourself in order to be a good attorney, a good employee, a good manager. So start practicing things like learning to say no. I mean, I know that sounds silly, but that's something that's been hard for me. I have a lot of good working relationships. A lot of people reach out to me and ask me to do stuff, and I'm always happy to do it, but before you know it, you haven't seen your friends in a long time, and you're working super long days to make sure that you're meeting all of your professional obligations. And if that's not something that you're practiced at, that could overwhelm you very quickly. It's also important to make time to recharge your own battery. And so talking about earlier the know thyself concept of this, it's important for you to find out how you most effectively recharge your battery. And that, again, is something you may have already been doing through college or through law school. But if you've been doing it sort of accidentally or through trial and error, I would encourage you to be a little bit more intentional about figuring out how you really restore yourself, because that's going to be critical. Doing this is not selfish. You're not weak. You cannot maintain or sustain yourself in this career in a long-term way unless you figure out how to keep yourself healthy and happy over the course of many decades. So, I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about how to do this. So, it's probably obvious from what I've been saying, but there is no one-size-fits-all answer by any stretch in terms of how to manage yourself, your job, and your relationships with other people, which is why I have been repeating this concept of spending time getting to know yourself and your needs and what you respond to in an intentional way. When it comes to improving communication and listening skills, that is an area where corporate America has gone gangbusters producing videos and instructional books and analytical books, and so there is a wealth of resources out there that you can access related to becoming an active listener, becoming an active communicator. A lot of them are geared toward HR and management professionals, but don't lose sight of the fact that being a lawyer forces you in a way to, in some circumstances, become an HR professional or become a management professional, because you are going to have to interact with all kinds of people doing very different jobs in the work you do as an attorney. With regard to figuring out your communication style, I would encourage you, even though I know some people have strong opinions about these, to consider taking a personality test. Like, there's a bunch of them. There's Myers-Briggs, which a lot of people know. There's the DISC assessment. There's the Winslow personality profile. They're often free. They're usually easily accessible on the internet. And I know some people have some hesitation about the way these tests work, or sometimes the results of the tests. I'm not saying that you have to religiously ascribe to what the results are, but if they cause you to spend some time thinking about how you best accept information, how you relay information, are there ways in which you could improve, how do you take criticism, how do you offer criticism, all of those things are things you should consider, and a personality type could at least be a starting point to help you figure out what works for you and what doesn't work for you so well. And then on the concept of organizing, I'm certain that you guys have been engaged in that process as students. I remember that well. But once you figure out what works for you, invest in and maintain whatever system you have in place to track yourself and your life, whether it's paper, apps, giant calendar with sticky notes, whatever you do. And then lastly, I want to talk about stress management, because the American Bar Association just published, I think it was January of this year, a landmark study that they did in conjunction with the Betty Ford Clinic. And it was to analyze illicit substance use and abuse and mental health in the legal profession. If you have any interest, you can look it up. It's a very long study. It's comprehensive. It's online. It's readily available. And you can see the parameters of the study and all of their various findings. But what really stuck out to me, although sadly it didn't surprise me, and what I wanted to talk to you about today was that unlike some professions that do this similar type analysis, like with surgeons, where professionals tend to use and abuse substances and have more mental health issues as their career progresses, so it's more prevalent in people who have been working for longer. Among lawyers, attorneys at the beginning of their career experience the highest rates of problematic use of alcohol and drugs, and which is very unique, and the specific parameters are defined in the study. But sadly, I was not super surprised to read that, because although law school is difficult and it is stressful, I remember it well, I found going into practice, and a lot of my peers I think felt the same way, it's still an adjustment. And I had a job that I loved, but when you're ultimately dealing with people and their liberty or their finances, things like that, there are a lot of pressures that I had never experienced in law school, and I think that don't come into play when you're in law school. So, stress management is absolutely critical, and learning to practice it in an intentional way now is really important. So, like learning about communication style and listening skills, there are a lot of resources available, both online and in the community, to figure out how to develop the best stress management techniques for yourself. But I would encourage you to think about the following. You should think about what provides a quick fix for you. Quick fix stress management are things like breathing exercises or moments of mindfulness in conjunction with developing long-term healthy habits that will sustain you through what is hopefully a many decades career in this very rewarding but also very trying field. I have been coming to this campus for years since I graduated. I'm from St. Pete, and I stayed here after I graduated, and so I've seen the posts around campus over the years as they evolve, talking about make sure you run because it's finals week, and like have a healthy diet. And so I think sometimes we see those things and they kind of flow past us as you know, just a good effort that's out there, but they shouldn't be a momentary thing that you just think about when it's finals, or you just think about when you are mentally in a position where you feel totally burned out or overwhelmed. Because by developing long-term habits that are effective for you for stress management, you will be a better lawyer, you will be a better manager, and you will be a better employee. And that includes both physical mechanisms of coping, whether it be knowing how much sleep you need and genuinely making the time to get that, or if you are someone that responds well to physical activity, or making efforts to eat healthy, even though I know how difficult that is when you're running everywhere as a law student. Does not change when you become a lawyer, I promise you that. And then also the psychological things that you need to address in order to be a happy, healthy, and productive lawyer. Like making sure you spend time with friends and family, making sure that you do not abandon your hobbies and interests in favor of work, which I think comes up in law school. Make sure you're not abandoning those things in favor of doing your schoolwork too. And then the bar recognizes, and a lot of organizations recognize, that this particular field presents a number of stressors that can have significant impacts on practitioners. And so there are a lot of professional supports out there available specifically to lawyers. Of course, there are professionals that can help navigate stress, coping techniques, etc., that are not specific to lawyers, but it is absolutely absurd, the idea that someone has to take on this job and all of the difficulties that can arise with it on your own, whether it's in the form of a stress professional, a mental health professional, your support staff, your peers, your coworkers, your fellow lawyers, etc. you will always find resources out there to help you. And that's why it's important to manage your relationships with those people effectively and professionally and respectfully, because you'll need them and they'll need you too. So that's why it's important to build that in from the beginning. So I hope I'm not super short, but I just have a couple more things I want to say. The takeaway that I have for you, and I promise that this is not intended to be bad news, but legal practice is more difficult than law school. When I was in law school, I just felt like it was so stressful and overwhelming, and I was developing these organizational habits and study habits, and I felt all the time like, oh, this is just exhausting. But ultimately, there is more freedom and time off when you're in law school. There are less commitments than in the real world. I promise, I'm an overcommitter. I did it in law school, and I still do it professionally. But this is why this is good news, is because you're in like this tank sort of that mimics the practice of law in a slightly gentler way, where you can take the time, can and should take the time right now to think about these things, anticipate how you're going to handle them as they increase during your professional life. That applies whether you go off like I did and do government work, or if you're at a firm and you're working super hard your first 7 years to make partner. This is across the spectrum for legal practice. But there's good news. It's never too late to start. If you started already, that's great. It's also never too early to start, so everybody is doing a wonderful job. You can't be doing this wrong. So just focus on yourself, and that will allow you to be the best lawyer, coworker, counselor to your clients, employee, and advocate that you can possibly be. And that's all I have. Are there any questions?
I have one.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Can you talk about how often you take work home with you? How often you take work home with you?
I try not to, but I think this is something else that's unique about this profession, is that there are some jobs where you like close up your business or clock out and then you leave, and it's gone from your mind and it's gone from what you're doing. But if you have cases or if you represent clients, you're always thinking about those things. And you could be driving somewhere and think, oh my gosh, I should look up this article because that would relate to this case, or like, I hope I can go see this client later this week. And so I only a few times a month literally take my work computer home and work on stuff from home, and sometimes that's because my office is really collaborative, so in any given day a lot of people could come in and talk to me about various things, and sometimes I don't get to do my own work quite so much as I'd like to in a day. But I think one of the mental stressors of the work of the legal profession is if you have a creative mind and you care about what you're doing, you're always thinking, to some extent, some percentage of your brain is running on about your job and what you're doing and what you have coming up. And so in that way, it doesn't leave you. And that's why doing things where you're, to the best extent that you can, truly leaving that behind to focus on friends or family or activities, that's going to help you in the long run, not burn out.
Any other questions?
No? Okay.
When there's times when you can't say no to a boss and it starts becoming a little overwhelming, what do you do personally to manage all that? Because I know there's times you can't say no.
No, I agree. And especially young lawyers can't say no. And I'm not a professional, I'm not a mental health professional, and I'm not a scientist that participated in this study, but I really wasn't surprised to see that younger lawyers have some of these issues more often, because this is a field where, depending on your setting, you can be in a position where you have to work really, really hard when you first start out, and then as you advance in the field, you get to take it easy more or shift assignments to younger associates. I think that the best way to handle situations where you absolutely can't say no, or something unexpected comes up, you're given a project and it's the end of the day, is to develop this larger system for yourself and have it in place. And I'm sorry, that's like not, it's not like a easy prescription, but if you find yourself in a week where you have to work to what you know is your breaking point because of the nature of this job and because you've been asked to take on extra things that you absolutely can't say no to yourself, knowing how to recover in a healthy way and having a plan in mind to do that, even if sometimes you have to do it after you get to the point where you're sort of like burning the candle at both ends, as opposed to just having nothing in mind and taking an unhealthy approach at the very end of that time period, I think is a benefit in the long run.
You talked about the benefits of organizing yourself. Do you feel that it's possible to over-organize yourself to the point where you're like following your schedule so strictly that, oh no, I've only allocated 2 minutes to eat today and I've eaten for 3 minutes, that kind of a thing? Do you feel that that ever happens? Because sometimes I do. Not necessarily with eating, but like with, I'm going to do homework for 50 minutes and I've been doing this, I didn't understand this reading, it took me 55 minutes, and I have to rearrange my schedule.
Yes, that is very possible. And that would kind of be the outer edge of these parameters that I'm encouraging everyone to think about in their life. If you don't open your paper calendar or your Outlook calendar or whatever you use for 3 days in a row, you're going to miss things and you're going to be way behind, and that might be one end. But if you try to schedule everything in 5-minute increments, you're going to start falling behind. That's going to be a major source of problems and anxiety for you. So it is possible, very much so. And so it's important to think about both sides of that spectrum and find a place to the greatest extent that you can that feels natural, that you're able to maintain, unlike scheduling everything in 15-minute increments would be very difficult to maintain, that you're able to maintain and isn't a source of additional anxiety or distress.
Any other questions?
Yeah, okay.
All right, if you can all join me in thanking Sarah one more time then.